Right, now let's get some more analysis on what to expect at the start of trade today. Chris Weston from IG Markets in Melbourne joins us now. Chris, great to see you. Good morning. What do you think? It's going to be a pretty quiet open for riskier assets?
Well, I mean, if you're just taking away the market itself, the ASX 200 here, we're looking for a modestly down day, down about 8 points or so. But yeah, I think that it's been a pretty quiet weekend in terms of news flow. I think Ingrid summarised, most of it very, very well indeed. And yeah, I think the Euro's dropped about 10 pips on open today in Auckland trade. We've got the Aussie dollar trading down about 8 or so pips as well. If you look at US futures, I think the initial reaction was slightly down, but the US, both the S&P and Dow futures are trading pretty much bang on flat. The price of WTI and price of Brent also very flat as well. And I think most of the news flow has been around what we're going to see with Spain this week. All eyes in terms of a macroeconomic sense are really going to be focusing on the Spanish stress test this week. We've also got to look at the budget deficit targets. Are they going to come out with that 4.5% target, which we hope that they're going to manage to adhere to further down the line? That's been largely talked about, and obviously on Friday there was a slight positive bias to some of the risk assets. On the premise that perhaps they're going to, that the ECB will be so appeased by what they're going to hear from these budget deficit talks that perhaps they won't even let them have to sign a memorandum of understanding, which would be very good for all. But I think the chances of that are going to be very low indeed. And I think the Spanish, if they are going to request assistance, there's a pretty good chance they're going to wait till after the regional elections on October the 21st, which could see some pressure being put on Spanish yields in the short term. They may move up with the market trying to push Spain into requesting assistance. We also saw Mr. Schäuble, the German finance minister. I mean, he's been in multiple news articles over the weekend, but I think one that I looked at quite closely was the fact that he came out and said that the Spanish don't even need to request assistance because they've done enough in terms of reforms, something I believe in. I think they have put some very, very hard yards through their economy at the moment, but I think it would be really good for markets if they were to come in and request assistance, which is generally what we've been wanting to hear as well. So I think that's one issue. The other issue is what Ingrid talked about is the potential leveraging up of the European Stability Mechanism. This is the bailout mechanism, which is going to be ratified through the courts on the 8th of October. Now, I don't think they're increasing the target. I think what they're looking to do is leverage this up by having some private participation into that mechanism, very similar to the EFSF, which is superseded, very much in that kind of regard. So the 500 billion which they've got at the moment could be leveraged up to 2 trillion to help ring fence issues that's going through Europe and Italy throughout the rest of the year. So I think that's going to be an interesting one. That could get more airtime tonight in the UK and European trade. And then there's still continuous talk about what's happening with Greece. It does look like they're really struggling to meet this 11.5 billion in budget deficit cuts which have been talked about. But as it stands, risk assets are down a very, very modest amount, and it's a pretty quiet news flow weekend.
I just wanted to ask you a bit more about Spain. I guess then, given it's a quiet week, certainly in terms of data from Australia, do you think Spain will be the big focus then for markets this week? You know, whether, the bank stress tests, what they reveal certainly, and whether those banks actually need more than that 60 billion euros that the Spanish economics minister was talking about over the weekend, and whether the cabinet actually passes the budget, that sort of thing?
Well, I think they will pass the budget. I mean, there's a number of factors which could be involved. I mean, you wouldn't like to be wealthy in Spain at the moment. There's going to be the wealth tax, which was recently put in, is going to be lowered to a threshold of potentially 108,000. I think that the 4.5% is the level that they want to get it down to in terms of the deficit to GDP target. They have a history in the last couple of years of missing those targets. So whether, this is why the bond market doesn't give it so much belief. I mean, Mr. Schäuble have come out and said that Spain has put the hard yards through, but they're not. The market still doesn't buy the fact there isn't a history of confidence there that they're going to reach these targets, seeing as they've missed them so radically in the last couple of years. So I think that's going to be one issue. Will we see the Spanish request assistance? Now, as I said earlier, I think October, once the regional elections have come out, will probably be a more fitting time. That's in line with what we've been seeing with recent speculation. But I also think. There was an article in the weekend UK Times that said that there's actually talks going on, secret talks underway right now between Brussels and the Spaniards, basically saying that we want to request assistance this week. I think that would be really, really good for risk assets if we did see this situation where they actually request assistance from the ECB for the ESFM, the ESFS and the ESFM this week. That would be very, very positive for risk assets and would keep a little momentum back into this side of things. In terms of the stress test, they've got a credit facility facility, a credit facility in place to the tune of 100 billion euros. So 60 billion would be good. There was also talk over the weekend it'd probably be more likely to be about 80 to 90 billion euros as well. So, yeah, I think the lower the better, really. But you know, I think that 60 billion total was, as you said, coming out from the finance minister. That would be reasonably good for risk assets. And you know, considering as the IBEX is up nearly 19% this quarter, you know, that market has priced in quite a lot of good news in recent times.
And this, obviously, I mean, going forward, do you get the sense that riskier assets are likely to struggle to find catalysts to continue the upward momentum at this stage?
Well, I think so. I personally, I think that the trade for me is don't chase the rally, buy the dips is still the way to go. I mean, the Fed, I think every central bank's got this race to debase going on at the moment. That liquidity that's sloshing through the system should be very, very supportive for risk assets. I also saw that only 8% now of hedge funds are outperforming the S&P. That should be bullish. We're going into the end of the quarter this week, and you know there could be a chase for performance as well. They've got to go back to clients and say, yeah, the S&P's up 12, 13% or so, and we're up 1%. I mean, it's very hard to justify this. So there may have to be a little bit of last-minute chase to performance. We're seeing big equity outflows despite S&P pushing up and making higher highs. You know, last week we saw the AMG data coming out saying there was another $2 billion of outflows for equity funds, most of that money regaining a home back in the fixed income market. So I think the FX market will be very interesting this week. You know, as I say, there's probably going to be some position squaring. The Swedish krona, for example, up 5.5% relative to the dollar. The Aussie dollar actually only up about 2%, second worst performer in the G10. Do I think markets can push up? Yeah, I think we probably can, but I think we're going to need to see the Spanish come out sooner rather than later, request assistance. And yeah, I think we're going to have to see some of that chase performance issues coming through, because otherwise, yeah, I think a pullback, in all honesty, would be a very, very positive thing. It would get rid of some of those weak longs and attract some fresh capital back into these markets.
Thank you so much, as always, Chris.